Stop. Take your seats, please. Sit.
Right on time. Tiki time. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Mahalo mucho. Aloha and howdy. And welcome to the second annual Tiki-themed panel here at Dragon Con. We hope to make it a tradition. Got a great crew here. My name is Mike Gordon. I'm a podcaster. I am a host of the weekly Earth Station 1 podcast. I'm also a comic creator and writer. My comic Tiki Zombie has been going for a little over 5 years now. Thank you. Keep the applause down. But we are here to talk all about Tiki and art, the art of the Tiki, in fact. And we've got a great panel here. I guess we'll start all the way at the end of the table. Okay. Yes, this is your first year at Dragon Con, correct?
That's right.
First year at Dragon Con. Right, yeah. Mr. Robert Jimenez. Up here from Fort Lauderdale. Cool.
Yes.
And then, of course, we have, this is his second panel, repeat. He was on the panel last year, Jonathan Chaffin from Horror and Clay. Making his grand return to Dragon Con, Shag. And, of course, our hometown hero, Derek Yaniger. Awesome. Thanks, guys. We appreciate it. As speaking of Dragon Con, so, Robert, we know this is your first. Jonathan, how many Dragon Cons have you had now?
19.
19.
Get out.
19.
How old are you?
I know, that's what I was saying. I'll be 40. No, I started volunteering as a teenager.
And Shag, you've done this before, right?
This is my second Dragon Con.
Second. Awesome. We're glad to have you
I
back.
do it about once a decade.
Awesome. Derek?
8, 9? I lost count.
I have been coming to Dragon Con since 1994. I have not missed a Dragon Con since 1994. So.
Nerd.
That's me. This is my home. This is my highlight, and this is the highlight of the weekend. So great job. So for the panel, of course, is the art of Tiki. I'm kind of curious now, since all of us, none of us are spring chickens, but of course none of us were around when Tiki first blew up and became like a pop culture phenomenon. I'm wondering how each one of you got involved and what inspired by Tiki itself. What was it about? Because there's a lot of different aspects to Tiki. So what was it that grabbed you first? And I guess we'll start with you, Derek.
It's a mad world. Remember that? And who was that? Dick Shawn, I think was the actor. Played the son, and he was the beatnik, and he had the surf shack. And he's in that scene, and it didn't hurt that there was a bikini girl doing the Watusi throughout, but I didn't notice the girl. I noticed the Tiki in the background, and I was like, nerd. So I was fully into Universal Monsters and Monsters. I thought, oh, this is cool. So that was my first introduction.
Gotcha. Jack?
Well, when I turned 21, I had a couple friends, and we liked going out to, this is in Southern California, we liked going out to what we called old man bars, which were basically bars that had been unchanged since the 50s or 60s. And our favorite were the Polynesian themed bars, because if you paid an extra $5, you got to keep the ceramic tiki mug your drink came in. So we started collecting those and got into Tiki through that. And throughout the entire 80s, I thought me and my two friends were the only people on earth who liked Tiki, collected Tiki, or cared about Tiki. And then in the, late 80s, early 90s, I met a guy at a flea market, and he had all this Tiki jewelry on. And I said, "You like Tiki too?" I thought, this is the fourth guy on earth who likes Tiki. And he said, "Yeah." And I have a little group of friends, and we like Tiki, and there's this German guy who gives symposiums about Tiki. And I'm like, well, count me in. So a couple months later, I went to a backyard party in Venice, California. This guy named Otto von Stroheim was putting it on. And the German guy gave his symposium. His name was Sven Kirsten, who later went on to write the book of Tiki. So I got to know those guys, and I realized there were more people on this planet who liked Tiki. And that was right about the same time I was transitioning from being a commercial artist and graphic designer into doing my own art. And the only thing I wanted to paint early on was Tiki stuff, Tiki bar scenes mostly. And people were responding to it. And so originally I thought I maybe had 10, 15 paintings in me, and they were all going to be Tiki paintings. But after about the 15th painting, I thought I got to expand my repertoire a little bit. So I started painting other things. But initially it was all Tiki art.
I'm another one that watched a lot of TV as a kid, and watched a lot of Nick at Night, a lot of old, and a lot of the shows all had like the tropical episode, the beach episode, or the bar episode, and there were always the carved tikis, and you'd see there were always fish out of water stories. The Munsters have cocktails or what have you, and I love the set design. I love building things, and I love. For me, it was kind of the cars first, where all of Ed Roth and all the custom car scenes, and then the more you go into that, the more there's Tiki overlap. So learning how to build that stuff, you do a lot of sketches and part of how I got into designing was designing layouts for sets and props and that sort of thing. So that kind of led me, once I started going to the bars for the immersive experience, I was hooked. I fell in love, So the TV shows is where I got into it, I think.
Okay, for me, I guess there were a couple things going on. I live right next to the Maikai, and had never been to it, really, and would drive by often, and you all know the exterior and the sign and the foliage, and it was always pretty mysterious, and I had no clue as to its history, anything about it. And then I think with the advent of Facebook and Twitter, I resisted getting on these things for probably the first couple of years. But then when I did get on Twitter especially, I found a lot of artists who I started following, and one of them who's not a Tiki artist at all, his name is Ryan Milner, I think. And he had a one-man show where he just did moais. It was like a series of 50 of them or so, and they were just themed different. Some of them had, like one of them had the Batman cowl, and they were just worked up. It was mashups, and I just loved the look of the moai, and I'd always seen that as well. So I just kind of started getting an interest in drawing them, and that all led me to Tiki Central, which is the forum, which I think some of us still post on, but maybe it's not as active as it was back then. But, just going on there, obviously I saw their work, Derek and Shag's work everywhere, and Doug Horn and Ken Ruzick and all these guys, and just started, I've always been an illustrator, but it just opened that side of that art world to me. And then I was into low straitjackets since probably the beginning. And it's one of those things that just everything converged. The Maikai was always omnipresent, but I didn't know what it was. And then Tiki Central, and I would buy every low straitjacket CD that came out. And then just looking at their website, I saw them at a thing called the Hukila. And I didn't know what that was either. I don't know what year that was. About 8 or 9 years ago, I guess. Because I've been vending for, I think this was my 9th year, the past Hukila. So I think it might have been a year or two before that. So I just started, just researching everything online and creating at the same time and posting on Tiki Central. And that just led to a growth of my art in that direction.
I think for me, the two earliest influences as far as that I can remember of Tiki was the Enchanted Tiki Room at Walt Disney World. I've never been in the one in Disneyland yet, That's something I want to do one time. But the one in Disney World was amazing, and of course the Brady Bunch episode.
Yeah.
So because they're very different, They're two different aspects of Tiki. There's the spooky, the curse of the Tiki elements, the adventure aspect of it, and then there's the laid back Disney, warm-hearted, like everything's all right, man, kind of thing. Like that's really awesome, and I like the mixture of the two. As far as early influences, who were some of the artists that kind of inspired you? Go ahead.
Jim Flora, I know he's a big here too.
Yeah.
Jim Flora did a lot of album covers, 40s into the 50s. I just dig his style the most. So he was a real big influence. But really, for me, all my influences are guys that are long gone, dead, mostly. So I'm essentially a grave robber. I mean, I just, and I've got massive collections of old men's magazines and old calendars and just anything, just so much crap. So that really flips my switches. I mean, all that old stuff, I just can't get enough of it. I'm constantly looking at files on my computer, thousands of images that I paw through, and I just always spark something new, and it kind of gives me a starting point, and I go from there. So, I mean, all the Disney stuff, not all the Disney stuff, but the Ward Kimball Disney stuff, Disney shorts, and just really even like the cheapest little recipe, Betty Crocker recipe book, with just simple little line drawings in the margin without a register color. I mean, the simplest little thing, I just go ape. I love it, man. And so that's really where it all kind of started for me, and I started became obsessed with what makes Tiki look Tiki. I mean, what looks retro look retro. I mean, Tiki was always a big part of it, but mostly just anything that retro, anything that conjures up that feeling or that reminds me of my youth, So that was my obsession, was why when I look at this, does it take me back to that time? Why does it remind me of my childhood? It's the type, it's the color, it's the line work, So that really became the driving force, and that's still what does it for me. So.
Okay.
Well, what he said, a lot of.
You can't piggyback on me.
But also, the very first artist I remember seeing whose work kind of epitomized a little bit of what I was what I would later do in my own work, was an artist named Gene Deitch, who had done these cartoons in jazz magazines starting in the late 40s. And the way I found out about him was R. Crumb, the 60s underground comic artist. He put out a magazine in the 80s called Weirdo. And it was mostly like that kind of R. Crumb art, which didn't really appeal to me very much. But I remember looking through one, and he did an article about Gene Deitch, because R. Crumb is a big jazz music fan, and Gene Deitch had done a lot of these jazz magazine drawings. And I saw those drawings, and I was like, what is this? This is totally I don't know what this is, but I love it. And I thought, if I ever do my own art, I want to kind of like draw from that a little bit. Now, if you go back and look at Gene Deitch's work, it doesn't really look anything like mine, but it was kind of that spark that made me want to work in a graphic style that sort of harkened back to the 50s and 60s. And also album covers, you go to the thrift store, you're leafing through the albums. Even photography, photo of a cool bachelor pad, with a bachelor in his bachelor pad with like some mounted trophies on the wall, but they're all women's heads.
Yeah.
Things like that. So a lot of, real life things influence my art.
At heart, I'm a collector. Anything that I get more than 3 of, I have to have as many of them as I can until I get tired of them. And because of that, like the influences are sort of a gestalt of all sorts of things. I love toy designers. I like McFarlane toys. I like Robert Williams. I love surrealists, partially because they have that juxtaposition in the collage of real world elements and fantasy elements and bright colors. People like Robert Williams and Ed Roth, I already mentioned. Dali, I love. A lot of the Imagineers that did environments for Disney. I enjoy looking at their sketches and their workup, that sort of thing. Mark Ryden, I love fine artists that, because I'm not very technical. I do a lot of digital, I do a lot of sketches, and I do a lot of cleanup. So I love people, like I love your brushwork. I love people that can do fine art with oil and acrylics in a realistic way, creating these fantasy settings. So a lot of the book cover artists that used to do work for TSR. That's the stuff that I have had that has place of pride, surrounded by all my toys and my junk. Because for me, it's sort of a kaleidoscope of influences. I love Dali, and I love German Expressionism, and I love Gustave Doré, and a lot of the people that do black and white, very detailed lithographs and steel plate engraving. So really, it all kind of mashes up. So I have trouble picking names.
Sure.
You're talking about Dolly Parton?
Exactly. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I love her mustache.
Yeah.
For me, I guess the start of it was the local newsstand in my Brooklyn neighborhood where I grew up, where it was basically comic books and trading cards. George Perez, Jim Aparo, Neil Adams, a lot of the early 70s, I guess, comic book artists were my biggest influences, I would say. And I think it probably still shows in almost everything I do. And then definitely Wacky Packages was one of my most favorite things when I was a kid. I still have memories of getting those packs at the corner newsstand. And then growing up, comics were probably the biggest part of my life artistically for a long time. Probably into the early 80s, I think, is when I probably let up on buying and reading comics, and I really don't even know very much the state of it now. But it's still there. It's still what probably informs almost everything I do. And recently I found, in addition to these guys, and I mean that, and Doug Horn, and those guys were really influential. But recently I found an artist who's like just completely out of left field in terms of those influences. Ryan Heshka, I don't know if anybody knows him. Yeah. His stuff I can just look at forever. And I would say that's it. It's probably, and then movies were a big influence on me. The Sunday morning movies I'd see in Brooklyn, which was usually an Abbott and Costello movie followed by some sort of schlocky horror movie. That's what probably influenced me, and just the art of those movies and Planet of the Apes and all that. That's something that I think is present always in my work.
Awesome. I'll switch gears a little bit because it's something that it's been on my mind a lot lately, because I think I'm at the point now where I definitely want to start working on my first, designing my first Tiki mug. Because the Tiki mug is one of the iconic things about Tiki, right? At least Tiki pop culture, right? What was your experience? What was it like creating your first mug?
It was good. It was exciting. It's pretty cool because I used to do, I worked for Cartoon Network for a lot of years and did a lot of character development stuff. I did do a lot of heavy animation, but I would do, and so I had to do turnarounds. I'd have to design a character and draw him front, side, 3/4. So it was really a twist on that. I had to, so I was able to really kind of taught me how to draw and think in 3D. I still struggle with it though, because so much of what I do is such a flat, is just shapes interacting and overlapping, and so I really have to work at it actually to get but I've done several mugs with Tiki Farm and done some with Monk Tiki or Mun. Is it Mun Tiki? It's Monk Tiki.
Monk Tiki.
It's Monk.
Yeah.
Monk Tiki. And and I just give them the turnarounds. You know, I've never really done any of the sculpts or anything. I leave that to the professionals. But yeah, so it's really kind of fun to think in 3D and to think what you can do and to take something and wrap it. It's pretty cool. And when you get that first mug, when you get that delivered and you see your art in 3D, it's a gas. I mean, it's really, really cool. Yeah. So.
Yeah, especially for you, Shag, because you said you started collecting them, right?
Yeah.
So the opportunity to finally do one must have
Well,
been
I
amazing.
remember, I collected mugs going into the, probably 1985 or 86. And late 90s, I think, somebody started making new mugs, and it was Mug Tiki.
Oh,
They were the
I
first,
didn't know that.
like, new guys making mugs I had ever seen. And I remember thinking, like, well, if these guys can make mugs, I can make mugs. And so, right about that time, Tiki Farm, which is a big mug manufacturer now, I knew the guy who had started the company, and he asked me if I wanted to design some mugs. And I struggled too, because I'm totally two-dimensional flat as well. And so it took me a long time to come up with drawings, but I finally did, and they released these mugs, and I've continued to do mugs. And now, I like working with sculptors because I don't sculpt myself. I did in college, but it's not something I want to do. And I like working with guys who can kind of look at a drawing and translate it into a mug. So sometimes I'll just draw the front of the mug and say, you come up with the sides and the back. Because who cares about it? I mean, the sides and the back should look good.
Nobody's going to see the sides of the back.
So I design probably 1 or 2 mugs a year now.
Nice.
So honest.
It's about the turnarounds. It's a big part of it, and learning what details will hold and how many mug pieces you have to have. When I design, I tend to put in a whole lot of details and then have to pull them out and then pull them out and pull them out in order to have the thing work properly as a tiki mug. My mugs tend to have a lot of little hidden bits and bobs that it took me a little while to learn how to make sure that they hold up to the process. I'm not a sculptor. I fabricate large scale stuff, so I work with sculptors. I've worked with Tiki Farm and Monk Tiki and Ekum Bukum are all great guys for helping bring designs to life. And getting used to the lead time is interesting because it takes a long time to have things produced. And storage.
And shipping.
And shipping, yes. I was talking earlier, I said that my UPS guys hate me. They absolutely, they do. And I've had furniture in my house. Usually it's a bunch of boxes of tiki mugs with like fabric sheet over it. Oh, I love these bar height tables. Where'd you get those? Don't knock that over. But it's fun. I love it because like I said, I collect everything. The first tiki mug I got was a 10-cent little Hawaiian thing back when a prop warehouse in Atlanta went out of business. It's cracked. It's one of the tiki lilani. Very, very common, and I adore it because it cost me a dime. But yeah, working on your turnarounds is the most challenging part, I think.
My first mug was with Ekum Bukum, also John Mulder, and he encouraged me to sculpt. I'd never sculpted before, and I had an idea for a little Tangaroa on a boat, which I came to later find out there was an old Tiki Farm mug like that. Looked different, but it was the same concept. But it was a little old boat with a Tangaroa on it, and if I remember, he's holding a fish, I think. So John encouraged me to do it, and I went out and bought Roma Plastilina, and it was really hard. It took me many months, and I would send him photos, because he's in Alabama, and he would look at it and tell me, well, I don't think this is going to work, or that's going to work, and then I'd make changes, and that was a really nice mug. I think you might have that, right?
I think so.
I was really, your question, I guess, when I got it, it was really exciting to hold this thing, and like Jonathan's saying, I got a huge box full of them, several boxes full of them, and it did really well. And it's just such a difficult process because I'm mainly an illustrator and I paint, but it's a totally different thing. And just, I don't know if you guys have to think about, well, you two I guess haven't sculpted, but just how the mold releases is so complicated. You have to think of this thing in relation to the mold being pulled out, and there can't be what they call undercuts where the mold will cut out it's difficult. But then I did a few more. I think I've done, I honestly can't remember, maybe 4. I was doing this Marquesan styled mug, and I just could not get the mold right. So I just did it as a bust, and sold a good number of them. And Gecko was at someone's house in Long Beach who had one on his shelf and saw it, and he asked who had done it, and the person referred him to me. So Gecko asked me to send him one, and I did, and that was my first mug with Gecko. He took my Marquesan and did his thing all over it, and that was at Tiki Oasis a couple years ago. He did a small run of it, and it sold out right away. It was a really nice mug. It's called a Tehuka mug. So that was my second official mug, I guess. And I've done a few on my own with a local artist in Florida, a little barrel mug, and I am always asked to do another, but the sculpting is so daunting that I haven't approached it yet, but I do have a few ideas. Definitely want to do a chimp at some point. Chipmunk.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Cool. Well, now I want to open it up to you guys, because I know you guys have questions. So, yes?
Could each of you kind of talk about your day and the hours that you keep and sort of your process?
My day. Thankfully, this is all I do. Freelance. I mean, I've been freelance even when I was doing Marvel and I was doing Cartoon Network. It was always freelance. So it's 30 some odd years I've been working at home, which is great. I just love it. I got no rush hour. I mean, my rush hour is if I'm going downstairs to my studio and there's a cat sleeping on the stairs and I gotta step over. That slows me down a little bit. I don't appreciate it. But so it's incredible. But you know, get up. I usually try to do go to the park, do a run, think about what the hell I got to do today, and listen to some music. You know, some Blossom Dearie the other day. Oh, Blossom Dearie. Anyway. So, this is off topic, I guess. So, but that's it, and then, you know, have my coffee, you know, and then so 10 a.m. or so I start, and I jump from thing to thing. I work on, usually juggling several things, you know, a day. So I'll paint a little bit if I'm working on a painting, or I'll work on a sketch for if I'm doing a LP cover for somebody or a logo or whatever.
What percentage is digital versus physical?
Well, I prefer to do as much as humanly possible by hand. Digital is, I find, cold. I want some warmth. I mean, I want, at the very least, and most clients want digital. You know, you're going to want digital if it's going to go on a T-shirt or a screen print, or, you know. So at some point, it has to, you know, be digitized in some way. But I do all my line work by hand, my, you know, black line work, and I do this real kind of drink too much coffee, scratchy line thing, you know. So I do as much as I can and scan it in and add color and stuff. But it's probably half and half. It's probably more digital than I would like. My favorite thing is painting. Do paintings, acrylic on wood, and that I really love because it's, you know, and I love the feel of my hand on the paper. I don't use one of those the tablets. And the people, I don't know how anybody does that. I like to have that dirt, that graphite all over my hand at the end of the day. You know? So that's really, you know, what I do. But so I juggle and then, you know, work till, you know, 6 or 7, make my cocktail, and clock out. You know, I don't work nights. And then yeah, that's what I do pretty much. You know. So, does that answer your question?
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
Okay, my first one is, when you're illustrating, when you're starting your paintings, or do you start with the background first and then add the people? And then my next one is, I'm old enough to remember the 60s, but why do you think it's making such a resurgence now with the youth? Just wondering. I love it, but I don't know why.
Shag, what about the background question?
I start with the background.
Yeah.
When I'm doing a painting, the first thing I paint is kind of the overall color that that painting's going to be. So like, basically the entire, I paint on wood panels mostly. I'll paint it orange and then build up from that. So the things farthest in the back, like the mountains in the background, I'll paint those first, and then some palm trees in front of that, and then it works its way up until the last thing I paint is usually the biggest person in the painting because they're closest to the viewer. So it's almost like animating, where they start with the backgrounds and work their way up.
It's like layers in its most natural form.
Yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you.
It would be weird to me to start off painting the person in the front and then trying to paint around them to paint the background.
I got you. Thank you.
I think in a fully two-dimensional way. So I don't really do that. I mean, I really have great respect for the artists who can put a canvas, on an easel and just go. There's no freaking way. I'm much more like the Ford factory. I'm very, I go through my steps. I work out. I want everything worked out before I even mix up any paints. I want all my color figured out and worked out. I want to know exactly what I'm going to do. So yeah, I mean, I do like you don't do. I mean, I start with whatever and then I paint around it, But I do that where I figure out what is the overall color, what background color. I usually figure that out first and then go from there.
Thank you.
Robert?
Which question?
The background.
I am not really formally trained in any way, so a lot of what I've picked up has been from a few books and YouTube videos and fellow artist friends. So I used to kind of do, I guess what Derek was saying, you can understand. I used to kind of just go in and work, and that causes you to have to rework many areas many times. But I've been trying to get a little more disciplined, and I think it's shown a little bit, but I'm trying to start with a full drawing, as good a pencil drawing as I can start with. And then I go in and I do what's called an underpainting, which is it could be it's a monotone. It could be, let's say, like an amber, depending on what the final piece is going to be. It could be a purple. It could be something, and I just go in and try to do a monotone painting, more like an illustration, I guess, of the piece. And then if you do that and you do it well, and I don't know if I'm still quite there doing that well, because it takes patience, and you're redrawing this thing now for like the third time, because maybe you did a sketch or a drawing, then you transfer the drawing to your canvas, and I tend to work on wood as well. So you've drawn it 3 times, now you got to draw it again in paint, monotone, and then you come back in and you start overlaying the colors over this drawing. So it's kind of all there. But my style is, my strokes are fairly impressionistic and loose. So that is not so much of an issue. Whereas, of course, Shag and Derek have super sharp lines, and so that's not too much of an issue. But that's basically how I work. It's kind of all coming forward at the same time, and then you just leave the back a little desaturated, the foreground more saturated, because that's how it is. If you go out to the Grand Canyon, whatever peaks furthest away are grayed out. So you just start building up the color that way.
As far as the second question, it's really interesting because as far as, it seems like a lot of people will come to me and they say, oh yeah, Tiki's in, or Tiki's out, or Tiki's in, or Tiki's out. Have any of you noticed any sort of pattern as to why at certain times it seems like Tiki is in? Is it a pop culture thing? Is it just...
I don't think it's ever been in.
We've got standing room only.
But a dragon talk.
No. I think to me, the way I look at it, having been there in 1990, 91, when it sort of like the actual resurgence began to manifest itself, it's kind of this slow climb, and then it kind of did like that, but I don't think it's ever gone down. You know, I've been going to Tiki Oasis in San Diego, which was originally in Palm Springs, since the beginning. You know, they just had their 17th year. And every year more people come. It's to the point now where the rooms sell out in like 5 minutes when they go on sale. And it's, you know, even the surrounding hotels are selling out. So in terms of that, you know, I think more and more people are getting into it. But I did a panel with Sven Kirsten and Otto von Stroheim. Sven wrote the book of Tiki, Otto established Tiki Oasis. And Sven said he's worried because the young people, they like the cocktails, but they don't care about the decor. You know, they're really into the vintage cocktails, but they could care less about the tikis and the bamboo. And he you know, the millennials, I see millennials here, you know, why are you here?
They just want recipes. They're just here for recipes.
But like I said, after about my 15th painting, I realized, you know, I can't just stay in the world of Tiki. You know, there's other things out there I want to paint, and I never wanted to be known as a Tiki artist specifically. The same way when I started working with Disney, I never wanted to be known as a Disney artist. So I always worked to make sure there was, you know, I concentrated on other things as well.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know, who's making $1 million off of Tiki? That's,
Well, and that's, if you think about it, I mean,
Moana did quite well.
yeah.
but yeah, like in my neighborhood, if, you know, people, you know, ask, oh, what do you do? You know, you're mowing the lawn or whatever, and they come out and ask, well, what do you do for a living? Or the new neighbors move in, you know. And well, I do retro art, retro culture, you know, burlesque and Tiki, and they're like, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about. They probably think I'm selling crack or something. You know. But yeah. So, but yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think there's that little world. Another thing I love about it, and similar to what you were saying, is that I never wanted to be, you know, Tiki artist or anything. I just retro culture, anything retro. I mean, that could be Rat Bag, Vegas, you know, burlesque, whatever, rockabilly. So yeah, I mean that's really what does it for me. But as far as the question about the kids, I think, or the younger, them damn millennials, they don't have the reference that we have as older folks to remind them of their childhood, or you know, but there's something about it that they and I get this all the time where young people come up and go, where have I seen this? Where do I know this from? They can't place it because they don't have that reference, but they know it's different, they know it's fresh, they know there's something about it.
But in your case, when a 30-year-old comes up and says, where have I seen that? It could have been when they were 10 years old and they were seeing your art too.
Well, are you calling me old?
Like, this reminds me of my childhood. Yeah, because I was doing art in childhood.
Because they're seeing it. That's good.
Yes.
Hi, I'm a Dan millennial, and I love all of your work so much. I recently had a friend ask me what is Tiki, and it just like struck me that I couldn't really put in the words like what Tiki is. How would you each describe someone who has no idea what it is, what Tiki is?
It's fun. That's where I leave it.
Well, it's based around, I mean, originally it's kind of a pop culture phenomenon based around tiki bars from the 50s and 60s. So when Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic established their bars and they hired artists to do menus and other people to carve tikis, you know, it developed this whole sort of pop culture language. And then, you know, 25 years later, a bunch of artists and other people rediscovered this and took that same language to use in their art or their tiki mugs, or people were opening new bars. And it's sort of an escape from your real life, the same way it was in 1958 when some guy got off work at the factory and he and his buddies went down to the Maikai or wherever, the Kahiki in Columbus, Ohio, and pretended they were in Tahiti and forgot about their earthly troubles. The Mai Tais helped, you know, and it kind of transported them. And that's what I felt like when I was like 21, sitting in the same bar, drinking the same recipe, the same my Thai recipe that bar had been serving for 30 years. You know, I was transported too, and that was kind of what appealed to me about it. So actually the answer is I don't know what tiki is.
We need to get Sven here. He can tell us. He'll tell us
charts and
he'll tell us exactly what tiki is.
And what it isn't.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love about Tiki is that escapist element. And one thing that's I like to research as well is there were other types of theme bars at the time these guys started. That's why Tiki kind of grew out of nautical bars. But there were also like Spanish conquistador bars. There were also like Arabian, you know, the Fox Theater has a lot of Arabian theming going on. And part of why Tiki emerged are some of the other things that were the other cultural elements that were going on. The Pacific Theater, Hawaii becoming a state, the rise of certain advertising trends. And so the things that call back to that set of influences, for me, it's not just the tikis, but also the commercial art from that era, the escapist elements from that era, for me, always fit in the tiki bubble. But because we're now in the third or fourth iteration of generations discovering this stuff, you sort of have to, you know, are you talking about early tiki, or are you talking about revivalist tiki, or you're talking about like modern, like what does it all fit in? It depends on which circle in the Venn diagram you're looking at that answers the question, what is tiki? Like I can tell you what mid-century tiki is, and that's different from what probably tiki now is. And a lot of people will tell you, well, I know it's not tiki. And it's because you recognize what in your head fits in your collection. There's also an academic definition of what is mid-century tiki, and you can figure out what those tropes are and what that art is. For me, it's everything that kind of fits in the ball.
It's
I
definitely,
know all of those.
it's definitely affected by region too. I live in South Florida, and if someone asks me and I say I do some of my art is tiki, they think of the tiki hut in backyards, which are everywhere. And typically I have to show them something more than, I mean, Shag and Jonathan had great explanations, but typically I show them, and when they see a coup or something like that, they'll say, oh, okay, I know what that is. But I think a lot of people don't wrap, or can't wrap their heads around that there's an art world to that as well.
Yes.
I think in recent years, there's this discussion that's arisen about, I guess, what's called cultural appropriation. And I'm a little skeptical of balkanizing culture like that, but nevertheless, people debate about it. Is that something that the tiki art community has had to defend against, or is kind of Polynesian pop so far removed from the original South Pacific culture that the connection was severed long ago, and we don't worry about that?
I've had to defend against it personally. I had an exhibit at a university, and somebody on the faculty wrote a letter to the person who curated the exhibit, basically saying, "You're displaying all this art that's, you know, basically stolen the tribal gods of these actual indigenous cultures. Don't you think you should have had a parallel exhibit at the same time, you know, showing what those original idols and carvings were, you know, to sort of counterbalance this?" And I can't remember what I wrote back about it, but I basically said, what I do has, you know, is so far removed from the original context that there's nothing there. Like what, you know, say what a Hawaiian carved tiki originally represented, you know, the god Lono, you know. And what I do with that has nothing to do with the original, what it originally was, you know. And I have a teenage daughter, and she hates it when she sees white people with dreadlocks, because she says that's cultural appropriation. And, you know, she's at that age where, like, what they think is cultural appropriation versus what I think is cultural appropriation is different. So I'm like, so you don't listen to rock and roll either, huh? Because that was, you know, that was stolen from black people, you know. She's like, no, that's not the same. And I'm like, why not, you know? I love cultural appropriation. That's what all civilization is about, you know. The Romans stole things from the Greeks. The Europeans stole things from the Romans, and that's why we have this civilization. The more appropriation, stealing even, that cultures do from each other, the more interesting it is, and you take the good things from other cultures and you use them in your own, and it makes your culture better. So that's the way I feel about cultural appropriation.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well said.
Absolutely. What else? Yes.
The popularity of the retro stuff and the Polynesian culture and all that seems all perfectly understandable. What I've never understood is the specific tiki idol thing itself being, they're always ugly, they always look very hostile and angry. Why the hell are those things popular, much less why do they remain popular? And Shag, to make clear, they definitely are. And I mean, you go to like a Dollar Tree store where you go to the party wear section and you find tiki tumblers and all kinds of colors. So it's out there. It's everywhere, but I never understood why. Can any of you explain?
I think my tiki pennant is hurt by you called him ugly. Like,
I have a theory. When the original Polynesian bars didn't have tikis, they just had bamboo and grass, palm fronds and things, and some pictures of hula girls. And then I think Trader Vic was the first one to put actual tikis in his bar. And I think people respond to faces and the human figure. It's something they can actually identify with or form a bond with. So like a whole wall covered in bamboo, that's just background decor. But once there was an actual god there looking at you, a carved wooden tiki head looking at you, and they do have a lot of different expressions, I mean, Easter Island heads they can look aloof or they can look really goofy, and I think that was the thing people responded to in those bars, and then they drew it on the menu too. And then you got your drink and it came out and there were these little faces looking at you, versus if it had come out in a coconut or something. Some of the drinks were served in coconuts, but there's not coconut culture. There's not a coconut panel, I think it's because it had a face, it had a face that was vaguely human. Eyes, teeth, a mouth, a nose.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes.
Sorry, this kind of actually goes along with that. I was thinking about this as you guys are all talking, and several of you have used names for the different tikis, and I don't know how many people here maybe are, just starting to kind of get into it, don't know, but can somebody explain what Lono and Marquesian and Ku and, all the different, because that also, I think, kind of answers his question. They actually are different gods that were worshipped by the people, but there's a different carving style on each of them, right?
Again, we need Sven.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to know the names, really. I mean, you see a tiki you like? I mean, most people know what an Easter Island head is, a moai.
Yeah.
That's a really
Raise
distinctive
your hand
one.
if you know what it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's weird because my stuff is so off of. I mean, I really don't use much reference, of actual tiki. I mean, similarities, or if I'm doing a artwork for Tiki Oasis or something, auto specifies a certain, Marquesan or whatever. Well, then I'll do my homework and do it. But for me, it's really just the thing that flips my switches the most is not genuine tiki and not the genuine stuff, but what popular culture did to it when they took it, redrew it, and put it on Bugs Bunny, and they did it on, and Scooby-Doo, and the way that they interpreted it, and the ridiculousness of that, and like Beatnik, I love Beatnik stuff, but it's not, because of Ginsberg or Kerouac or anything. It's because of Jethro Bodine dressed like a beatnik, or Herman Munster. That's what really jazzes me up. So for me, I'm just really, and I've gotten a lot of criticism from tiki freaks that are very particular about, well, it's not accurate. Actually, they were. I mean, it makes me happy. So yeah, that whole thing drags me down. I don't really care that much. Sorry.
Drag it down there.
I would say, just real quick, one of the things that will help you learn them, if you're interested in learning them, is there are maps of the South Pacific where they'll name the island groups and actually have like images of what they are. you know, like this is a Cook Island tiki. This is what this looks like. Here's where the moai are. Here's what the Hawaiian style looks like. Because in all these cases, you're talking about a bunch of folks on an island with rocks and trees, you know. So a lot of the difference is do we make the whole head? Do we make the body? And once you know what their sort of archetypes are, then what are they representing? What's the god represent? And you can pretty quickly pick up a shorthand for identifying different styles if you're into very literal carving styles.
Boring.
Thanks, Derek.
Go ahead.
Where do you see tiki art and culture going from here?
Ooh.
Trader Vic's.
Come with us.
First round.
They're closed on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's Dragon Con.
Drinks on
Shag.
Shag? I have no idea.
Yeah,
I mean, it hasn't gone away. I thought it was going to go away, you know. Early 90s, I thought this is played out, you know.
I'll put all my eggs in this basket. That seems like a wise thing to do. Yeah.
But
No,
you know,
it's
it continues on.
I think as long as you know, there's folks like yourself and the other artists out there, the musicians, the bars are still there. A lot of the old time bars and even some new ones. Artists will continue, creative people will continue to be inspired by them. So, and who knows what they'll bring to it. But did you have one?
Well, culture cycles used to kind of be who's got money and who's dying and selling their stuff cheap. So you could track trends, 30s, 50s, 80s. There are commonalities there because the grandparents are dying off and all their stuff is for sale in the junk shop. So the youth can go buy it and pick it up for cheap. So that gets incorporated in the youth culture. And then there's the nostalgia of their parents going like, I remember this, and now I have money to buy it. But those trends in culture have all gotten mixed up since the internet. So now nothing goes away. You get a lot of recombinant stuff. And,
eBay.
eBay. Yeah, it's not like what you can find in your local junk shop. It's what do I want now, I think Weird Al Yankovic said their garage sales flying around in the post all the time, which is pretty fair. So you can't really, I don't think you can say what it's going to do next because it's going to be whatever hits.
You said something about Tiki Oasis. Is there other festivals and fun things like that? Like I know there's Modernism Week, but it's hard to find those.
There's Hukilau in Florida, which I think is
Okay.
the second biggest sort of tiki festival.
Ohana by the lake.
Ohana in upstate New York.
Okay, cool.
A couple of them in Palm Springs.
Is Modernism Week, do they do Tiki?
They're usually tiki-related events.
Okay.
No, they're always tiki-related events for
Okay.
Modernism Week, actually, because there are 3 tiki bars in Palm Springs. I think that has the highest per capita number of tiki bars versus the population of anywhere on Earth.
Cool.
There are a ton in San Francisco area, and there are a ton in Chicago. Too. I don't think Chicago's the weirdest one, but there's quite a few number of them in Chicago. A lot of good ones too.
There's a Tiki Con in Portland.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
And if you're in Atlanta, Trader Vic's we have almost a monthly Tiki seminar there where we have between Ram and Exotica Music and some of the artists here have been presented there, so keep a lookout on your Trader Vic site for that too.
Cool, thanks.
Yes. Go ahead.
For Shag, when you worked for Disney, did they give you free reign or a tight leash?
They give me pretty free reign. The very first thing I did for Disney, which was 15 years ago, was I did artwork and designed merchandise for the 40th anniversary of the Enchanted Tiki Room, which is actually not owned by Disney, it's owned by the Disney family themselves. So they said, every piece of art you do, we're gonna have to run by Roy Disney. I'm like, Roy Disney's gonna look at my art? So the first image I did, is this family in the Enchanted Tiki Room, and one of the kids was like, yeah. And they showed it to him, and he's like, I don't like that closed fist. It looks like he's protesting. So I had to make his hand like that, So that's kind of the direction I've gotten from Disney. I was going to do artwork for the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction, and they said, no guns and no swords. And I was like, I can't do that. You got to go back. The lawyers say no guns and no swords, and I'm like, that's impossible. You have to go back and like push for guns and swords. So they went back. They came back and they said, yeah, you can do guns and swords. So.
Yes.
I wanted to ask how many people have a home tiki bar, or like myself.
Awesome.
I know of people in this room who have really impressive home tiki bars.
These guys up here are class star level. I have a tiki bathroom. I have a whole bathroom or something, but like there's
You don't have any of my
something
stuff
there.
hanging in
Yeah,
your
I do
bathroom,
actually.
I finally made it.
It's the Welcome to Tiki Island that I have the last one of.
The captive audience.
But I look at it,
You don't need to say anything.
I think hanging a piece of art above the toilet, especially if you want men to look at it closely, that's a great, more people are going to look at that piece of art than anywhere else in your house.
Captive audience.
That's what I want.
What do you guys like? Do you guys like to listen? Like when I write for Tiki Zombie, I have a playlist made up of all Tiki tunes from exotica to surf to rockabilly to like a lot of that stuff. And the CD that we did kind of incorporates that too. Do you guys listen to certain things when you're creating?
Yeah, the weirder the better. The more obscure, the stranger, the better. I really love WFMU, which is listener-supported radio. I think it's in New Jersey.
Jersey City.
There's a show called Fool's Paradise, and it is the worst garbage, the silliest crap you've ever had. The most ridiculous, horrible, and I just. It's the musical version of my artwork, really. The ridiculousness of it. So that's pretty much what I listen to. That or jazz or rockabilly or and I go and then exotica. So I mix it up. But yeah, there's always music going when I'm doing what I do.
Shag, you listen?
I go through stages. Sometimes it's music. Sometimes it's the kind of music you'd expect to be playing in one of my paintings. Old soundtrack music or old exotica. Sometimes it's silence. I get tired of listening to stuff when I paint. Sometimes it's the TV on in the background, but it's got to be the kind of shows you don't have to really look at the screen. So that's like Discovery Channel crime shows, where they talk a lot, or things like that. And sometimes it's more current contemporary music.
Since Spotify, I tend to have, I do a lot of freelance as well, so I bounce between projects, and I'll have different playlists that sort of epitomize the different things I'm working on. So it's like, oh, okay, and then I've got like Packing Boxes music, which is old heavy metal. So it's like, all right, we're gonna crank up some Guns N' Roses now and get out the tape gun. A lot of movies that I've already seen a lot. There'll be a lot of Princess Bride and stuff that I can watch in my head if I think about it, but not be distracted by it because I know it. And then, of course, when an artist dies, I usually listen to a lot of that, and you'll hear a lot of it pop up. So, like a lot of Prince a while ago, a lot of that kind of stuff. And you start seeing it creep in, and if it creeps in just a little bit, that's awesome. And if it takes over, it's like, oh no, you gotta go away.
I listen to a little bit of surf. I always have something on, but my tastes run more towards Wilco, some Crowded House. I love Crowded House. I always have them on. But actually, and podcast, Mark Maron, I like to have that on when I'm working. And The Honeymooners, I like to have that on for some reason. That reminds me, as a kid, I always remember the theme song. I'd be laying in bed, my father was watching The Honeymooners. And there's something about that theme song that it's so melancholy. And I just love, and I love the show. So I just have that running. But like Shag, sometimes like it reaches a point where I'm like, that's it, silence, and I have to turn everything off. Usually after about an hour or so.
Well, it's been an hour or so, and now we have to turn this off, I'm afraid. Hey, like that? Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Real quick, where can people find you
Well, we all have booths
Yeah, we're
up
all on
in
the same
Pop
floor.
Artist Alley on the third floor
America's Mart.
of the
Building
America's
two.
Mart building. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thanks, Tom and Ben and Jamie and all the staff for the comic room. If you've got the app, please vote for this. You can actually put 5 stars if you love it. If you didn't love it, 5 sarcastic stars. Let DragonCon know you want more Tiki programming. Thank you so much.